My final question will be, how can all levels of government, community groups, the private sector, and other stakeholders work together to better address the barriers that keep people from getting out of poverty? And the first respondent on this question is Mr. McNell. Your response, please.
Well, I'd like to make one comment on and I think it's a good question, because it is a community solution. Government can only do so much. Under this government, I've seen times where they've made it very difficult for some of our charities to function. Remember, there was a time when they closed off church suppers. These not-for-profit groups play a big role in our community, and maybe I see it more from a rural area where I see the local churches, the local clubs raising money, making sure people in the community are looked after. But they've made it very difficult and very expensive for these groups to continue. They forced them into a very small group that they are today. So the community is a big part of it, but the government can't wash its hands. It's got to, first of all, make it easy for these groups to operate. People prefer to be looked after in their own community by their neighbors. They can be part of the organization. It's just a good way of looking after your own community. You know them. It's just good for everybody. There are programs so the government's got to look after putting in place, and we think part of that is making sure that families have, it can be a family of one, it can be a family of 10, a proper income to look after their needs. Again, I go back to making sure there's good jobs in the communities, making it easy to employ somebody so that somebody new coming into the workforce, employers shy away from it because they know the penalty for having a problem with somebody at work, if they get hurt, is too great. Talk to employers. They could use help lots of times, but the barriers to get into employment are too great. So who is it penalize? Our youth. And it's reflected. One has to wonder, you got a group of people, high energy, wanting to work, get started, and their unemployment rates are double the average. There's got to be a reason behind that. And the reason is it's too difficult. The rules are stacked up against them. So we're looking at making some of those changes, making sure that some of the liability factors are offloaded to the employer and put back in the schools, making sure training is done there. So when people come out, they're all on a level playing field. A lot of the barriers to employment already looked after. You have to make it easier for people to work. And if I go back to, it's not that many years ago, those barriers weren't there. I think people have to say the opportunities were greater, and we just can't afford, we're not an island, we live in a big world with many different competing jurisdictions, and we've got to be competitive, and that's just part of it.
That was good stuff, Jim. You stole some of my thunder. I was going to talk about volunteer community organizations as well. And what I've experienced is that when we put government in charge of resolving poverty, we put them in direct competition with churches and charities. There's about 4 to 5 regular attendees to my rural church now. It's just about time to close the doors. And that's been a trend over the past 30 years. Amalgamations of churches, so that congregations close one church and they combine into another, and they switch back and forth. And they're in one during the winter because it's more, a little less expensive to heat and so on, the other one in the summer. And that's what we do with the last-ditch efforts to survive. These were vibrant places where volunteer charitable work evolved in our free society in early Ontario. And it's just about gone because it is in direct competition with government for the provision of charitable work. And I try to raise funds for community projects myself. I've been involved in things in the Bainville area where I live. And I've knocked on doors, and I've had people say to me, I've already paid for that through my taxes. I can't afford to give any more. So that, in a nutshell, is the transition of the role of government from being limited to the protection of my person and my property through a competent police force, and allowing me to retain what I earn a good wage through innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. And as Jim said, also when it comes to employing young people, I hired a kid last August to help around the farm, but I couldn't hire him back this summer. As Jim said, the risks are too great. The machinery is dangerous. He came from Quebec, moved to Ontario. I don't know what the rules are here. I try to stay away from government regulation as much as I can, but I think in Quebec he said he wasn't allowed to work until he was 16. Imagine that. It's not going to happen to my kids, because I'll train them myself, hopefully without getting caught, evidently, to drive a tractor when they're young and learn to be safe and competent. But that's part of the trend that I'm trying to encourage people to understand is dangerous. There's a moral hazard in giving your responsibilities to the government. We need to retain our liberties and take care of ourselves through freedom. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel my inner Lucy struggling to come out again. I have to say, with regard to charity versus government, and I've served on the United Way board, and I know that 19 agencies who access United Way money are all government agencies who don't have enough money to perform their own responsibilities. Meals on Wheels functions because of charitable dollars. Should seniors who have lived their whole lives in the community, contributed to the tax base, have to end their life waiting at home for a meal to come to them for free that doesn't come from the government that they would have merited, but has to be supported by charity as well? I think what governments have been doing has been shirking their responsibilities to maintain that strong public service. I've heard the phrase that leveling the playing field. It's government public services that is the great leveler in society. And to pass the buck to charity, that's an abuse. Now, a couple of times now I've heard Mr. McDonnell mention that minimum wage isn't really part of their program. They don't seem to think it's a problem. And it's an interesting disjoint between minimum wage and the rest of the wages, because, you know, it's a continuum. So I'm wondering, is this the precursor of maybe something like the federal temporary foreign worker program going to come down to us in Ontario here, which is really a way of undercutting Canadians who want to engage in the workforce, using not immigrants who will ever get a chance to live here in Canada, but people who come almost as indentured servants and have to leave immediately after the term that their employer has bargained for their services. I'm very suspicious. So many of the conservative programs seem to me to lead to a low-wage economy. And no, we don't want minimum wage, but we don't want lower wages either, Mr. McDonnell. And I hear from both my libertarian colleague and my conservative colleague so much about the good old days, you know, and how well off everybody was. Things were pretty tough on the farms 60, 50, 100 years ago too. I mean, my father came from a large farm in Alexandria. Well, you know, at the end of the day, only one can get the farm, right? Everybody else has to go out and look for a living in the resource sector and make their living somewhere else. So I don't see this, you know, the wonderful golden past that people sort of lament the passing of. It's civilization, you just got to get on with it. You can't go back.
Thanks for the question. Let's get back to it. Let's get back to how all levels of government can help with community groups and the private sector and other stakeholders. Everybody in this room is a stakeholder in this. You know, that's the reality of it. We live in a society, we need to help one another, and we need government to help us. Our government is committed to things like lowering auto insurance, continuing to make childcare more affordable. We've been through it. We've listened to each party talk about what they would do and what they wouldn't do. I think what we need to see though is we need to continue with things and not cut them. We need to continue with the seniors benefit where they get $1,500 to make their home more accessible. You know, we heard about it from a woman last night in Chesterville, and I know my grandmother, you know, she used that benefit before she passed away to make her home more accessible. We need to continue with those things. Our seniors need the aid and everybody else does. We need to encourage and continue to support groups like, you know, the Social Development Council. You know, we're not funding that from any government, you know, sponsored, you know, fund or anything, but we're helping out by providing grants that they can apply for to help, you know, their organizations run and work with other organizations like Open Hands and the other groups like the Agape Center, House of Lazarus, and the other groups that are in the area that are supporting those who are most vulnerable and those who need our help. We need to think about things like social enterprise. You know, it's funny, we all get up here, we talk about our party platforms, we all talk about how we're going to make things better by cutting this or building this or changing this or doing this differently. We need to think about things like social enterprise. Why aren't we encouraging, you know, those people who are in those situations to get involved with the organizations that I mentioned, like those in the community, and work together in order to form social enterprise, like, you know, a vegetable garden, you know, I mean, look at the land, look at the property that we have in and around SDSG. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we creating social enterprise so that those people can do something and help and feel the respect that, you know, everybody should feel? I mean, we need to do things. We need to get groups together. We need to work together with private industry, with those charity organizations to help them and to encourage them. It's not just a handout, it's about organizing and making the connections to get those people and those groups connected. I think that's the role that MPP needs to take. It needs to make those connections and get those groups working together so the most vulnerable get a better leg up and get that hand up that Mr. McDonnell was talking about. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank